Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jew Folk. This week I talk with artist and art consultant Candida Gonzalez. We talk about the importance of art in the coronavirus era, the intersectionality of being a queer Russian Puerto Rican Jew, and the concept of paying reparations on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Candida Gonzalez, welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you are a local artist and art consultant. What, especially in the sort of coronavirus era that we're living in, what does that mean, and how easily are you able to still do the bulk of your work?
Whew, that's a great question. So there's two different sides of that. My art, which at this point, I'm really focusing my artistic time on making jewelry. I make jewelry under the name Las Ranas Jewelry. You can find me on Instagram. And so that piece has actually been somewhat easy for me because I don't work out of a studio. My studio is actually my bedroom. And I've had plenty of time at home over the last 4 months, so plenty of time to make jewelry. It has been somewhat complicated because I am a single mother living alone with my 2 kids. But before quarantine, I would just make jewelry in the evenings after they went to sleep anyways. Of course, now their sleeping schedules are all over the place, but still, nighttime is my jewelry making time. Right now, I'm only selling out of a local shop, which is B Resale in Minneapolis, because the complicating factor was actually shipping out orders. And luckily came to an agreement with the shop, and they're shipping out all my orders for me. So glad to have already had that relationship in place. My other work is as a public art consultant. So I've been doing this work as an independent consultant since late 2018. I've worked with all of the big arts organizations in the Twin Cities. Right now, my work is mostly with Forecast Public Art, Springboard for the Arts, and I'm doing a project with the City of Minneapolis Public Art Department. And so those things have been quite interesting in quarantine. Again, my work is in public art, which with a big focus on community engaged art. And so it's been really interesting with not being able to talk or gather, and touch each other and be in public spaces together. What does that mean for public art? So a good portion of my time in quarantine has been consulting with artists, both in the Twin Cities and all over the country, on how to take their community engaged public art projects and make them operate in a way that's safe in the time of Corona. So a lot of my work has been working with individual artists and kind of counseling them through this big career change, because every public artist is having a career change right now, trying to navigate how to do this. So yeah, and I'm lucky I can work from home. I do all my work through the computer and Zoom and phone, and that's just kind of become reality now.
You and most of the rest of us at this point,
Exactly.
Unfortunately. I'd imagine that would have to be really difficult, that you don't get to have sort of that hands-on, face-to-face time with other artists, because art is such a visual medium that is so much different, and I would think more challenging to experience via Zoom or FaceTime or something like that, as opposed to the in-person either meetings or gatherings, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about that too. Also, how it has kind of evolved over the last 4 months. So one of the first things that I did that first month in quarantine, I worked with Forecast Public Art, And we created and published a document that was, I think, entitled Creative Alternatives to Engagement in the Time of COVID-19. And so we were really looking at, how do you still have meaningful events and happenings without being able to like have someone touch the art or gather together, and so I think that was a fantastic document because we really looked at all these people who were innovating within this first month. And, for example, there's a really popular dance night called the Clituation that happens every couple of months in Minneapolis, and it was supposed to happen March 28th, and they ended up doing it online over Instagram Live, which at that point in the quarantine, it was like a lot of people were doing Instagram Live, but not a lot of people were doing it working between like multiple DJs and multiple performers. So that was really fun. And just, watching how people could connect on the comments was great. And then, there's other things. There's another project that I'm involved in. The John and Denise Graves Foundation has their offices in Midtown Global Market. And I'm working with a couple of other artists to create a gallery there for youth. And the project is meant to mentor these artists through having their first gallery show. And the first gallery show happened to fall right after quarantine started. And so that was a really interesting situation too, where the foundation was like, okay, we're not going to be able to do this because nobody can actually come in and see an art show. So we're just going to put the whole project on hold. And we were like, whoa, wait, no, like this is a great opportunity for these young artists to still get their stipends and make their art. Like, let's figure out another way for this to happen. And so, we came up with a bunch of different ideas, like, just letting one person into the gallery at a time, doing a Facebook Live, like getting a DJ there, doing Zoom interviews with the artist, and again, so it's just like, yeah, we lose a lot not being able to gather and engage with art in the way that we used to. But rather than just saying, okay, it'll never happen again, or we have to wait until Corona is over, it's been phenomenal watching people improvise because we need to keep artists working, and we also still need to engage with art, like I think you've probably seen memes going around where it's like, how would you get through quarantine without artists, because we're consuming art on some level on a daily basis. And so, yeah, so it feels important to be doing that work right now and keeping artists working.
When did you know that you wanted to be an artist?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I went to Minneapolis public schools. I had the blessing of having an incredible art teacher who a lot of people in Minneapolis know, Denny Sponsler. He was my second grade art teacher. I still remember him teaching me how to draw trees and the difference between hot and cold colors. So I think back on my life and there's all these very formative experiences. My dad was always drawing, again, like, so I was born in 1978, so I was a child of the 80s. So, the difference between our childhood and the childhood of kids now, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have tablets, we didn't have phones. It was either go outside and play or stay inside and draw or read or fight with your brother and sister. So I had a lot of time doing art. And then when I was in fourth grade, I started going to the first arts and Spanish immersion school in Minneapolis. It was Longfellow International Fine Arts Center because my mom was one of the founding teachers there. And so then from fourth through eighth grade, I spent my days with this phenomenal arts programming, where I was drawing and creating puppets and playing violin and singing. And, so just art was a part of my everyday. And it's interesting because, I run into people who went through that program at the same time I did. And so many of us are in the arts right now, and like high up in the arts, doing great things in the arts. So, I'm grateful for that program. And then I ended up going to school to get my master's in education, because I decided that I wanted to be a teacher. Um, and taught for 5 years and happened to teach at an arts integration high school. And after those 5 years, I realized I loved teaching. I absolutely adored it. But I didn't enjoy the paperwork and procedure and all of that. And I was really into the arts administration that I was doing in this high school. And so I decided to just completely switch tracks and go into arts admin.
So one of the things that I found really interesting that I would imagine, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine would be really interesting, as a way to help with your art and the storytelling you do through art, is your background. You are a mixed Puerto Rican and Russian Jew, who is queer, non-binary. How do you you're straddling all of those different things, the intersection of all of those different things? How do you use that as an artist, or do you not at all use it as an artist, and you divine your inspiration from somewhere else?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. It's interesting actually. If you go to my jewelry Instagram right now, in the bio section, it says bits and pieces put together to create a semblance of a whole. And that statement, God, I'm blanking on the artist's name right now. It's Lawrence W. I don't remember their full last name, but that statement was on the Walker for a long time. And
Yes, it was. That's
yeah.
right.
And I feel like that statement really, really explains me, explains my art, explains the world. I think, so I'm 42 now. I think that I am finally at a point in my life, where I wasn't when I was a child, or, or a teenager, in my 20s, where I am really at peace with all the different parts of my background. I think, at some points, especially like in my 20s, it felt like they were contradictory. How could you be Latinx and Jewish? How can you be Puerto Rican and Jewish? How can you be queer and Jewish? And I think through a lot of soul searching and just getting to know myself, I've come to a point where it's like, all of these pieces are a part of me. They're all pieces that I've experienced, and who says they can't exist together? I mean, who says that I can't completely identify as a Jew? Because definitely it was a huge part of my upbringing, and Puerto Rican at the same time. Like, there it's sometimes hard to see, especially those two together here in Minnesota, because it's funny actually. There's like four other Puerto Rican Jews that I know in Minneapolis, and we always joke that we should get together and have the smallest picnic yearly ever. But, but I know in outside of Minnesota, Puerto Rican Jews are a thing. It's very common actually, and so I think that for me also, just kind of learning more about the world and learning more about Judaism, and learning more about the diaspora, has really helped me come to a place of like understanding all of the different bits and pieces and factors and history that have come together to make me. And going back to my art too, if you look at my jewelry, you will see that that I use a lot of the same pieces over and over again, but in different combinations. And again, I think about how do the different pieces of us and different feelings and emotions and way we move through the world and evolve, like how do they show up differently on a daily basis. I think that the most clear reference to my Jewish heritage, though, in my jewelry is my use of the eyes. I use the eyes and the hamsa a lot.
Hmm.
I do a lot of like protective talismans. So, the eye, I think is something also that like is it's something that's present in Jewish and in Latinx symbology, the use of the eye to repel any negativity or evil. So yeah, so far that's the way it really comes out in my jewelry.
Well, and I've noticed looking through your Instagram page, like there's a lot of like the crescent moon
Hmm.
shapes used in different ways, like half like rainbow sort of shapes, at least sort of that arch
Hmm.
used in different colors and different iterations, and so it really they similar sort of pieces but different colors and different shapes used in different ways is really kind of fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so going back to quarantine too, I mean, one of the things that's really gotten me through this is my art, because I just kind of sit down at my table, and if I'm feeling a particular emotion, I think about how can I represent that in a piece of jewelry, or how can I respond to that in a piece of jewelry, So if I'm feeling sad and heartbroken over, just being lonely and isolated, because I'm a very social person normally, I'm always out dancing, I'm always out traveling doing things, and so that's been a really big change. But how can I respond to that sadness and that isolation and heartbrokenness, like what colors or what stones or what imagery would help me alleviate that sadness, and then in the same
Mhm.
way too, like I recently made a bunch of earrings for Pride, because it was Pride Month last month, and so then I was sitting there thinking like, how do I represent our beauty and like all the different types of beauty that we hold, and all the different ways to be gay or queer, or trans or whatever, just like how do I present pride in everything that we are. So yeah, my art has really been a saving grace for me during this quarantine time.
One of the things we had mentioned before we had started recording was that you sort of went dark. You weren't posting new jewelry during the protests after the death of George Floyd. So for the last, so starting from Memorial Day through, I guess mid June, were you were off Instagram in that way?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting moment, where like the last thing that I posted on my jewelry Instagram was just a statement of Black Lives Matter, and that was I posted that the day that I had heard that George Floyd had been murdered the night before, and then I really struggled. I have a lot of different platforms, and I love Instagram. Instagram's my favorite platform just because I am a visual person, and I like how Instagram is really run on images and imagery. But as I like, that day moved into protest, and then, just was watching and experience everything that happened. It felt weird to me to be posting imagery of me at a protest, or, what I was doing or who I was seeing, or, I didn't want to use that to promote my work in any way. And so that's hard because my two Instagrams, my personal Instagram and my jewelry Instagram, my personal Instagram is really promoting me as a public art consultant, in a lot of ways. And so I felt like I had to jump off of there, and I just went over to Facebook and was just kind of information sharing. And then I told you about experience when I finally did come back onto Instagram. I had a ton of jewelry that I had ready to post before the uprising, and I had made a little bit during the uprising, and I was like, okay, it's time to focus on paying the bills again a little bit, and I got to get this stuff out there, and I had a bunch of images that I had printed out because I have like this kind of funny little art gallery in my front yard. And so they were all these great images from justseeds.org that were talking about, justice for George Floyd and, and getting together. Um, and so I used those images underneath my jewelry that I posted on Instagram. And just kind of in this like really not thinking moment, like my last 2 weeks had been George Floyd uprising, supporting organizers in the area, fighting for justice. And
Right.
so that imagery was just constantly in my field of vision. And I posted it and immediately got called out about using the image of George Floyd to promote and sell my work, which I was like, God damn it, Candida! Like, you intentionally have not been doing this for the last 2 weeks, and then you get back on and you do it. And so it was actually a really great moment for me to practice everything that I preach. So to listen, to be in dialogue, to fight defensiveness, because like all of these defensive feelings came up in me, to really sit with all of the uncomfortable feelings that came up in me and not try to push them away, to really interrogate myself, and push myself to learn from the situation. And I ended up paying some reparations to the person that spent their time interacting with me and educating me, because I was learning in that moment. And then just moving on in a more thoughtful way. So that was a really interesting and hard and great thing that came out of Instagram for me this last month.
Interesting. What is, you said you paid reparations too? How, like, you like gave like a monetary amount for their time?
Yeah, so so we had a little bit of a back and forth on
Okay.
Instagram, and publicly, and you can see it in the post. And even though it was short, I recognize that for this young Black person, it took time out of their day to address these things with me, to respond to me, to be in dialogue with me. It took time, emotional labor for them to think about it. And so after it was resolved publicly, I privately reached out to them and said, thank you for your emotional labor today and taking time to engage in this with me. How can I compensate you? And I offered, do you want a pair of earrings? Do you want money? Just let me know. And they responded and they said, thank you. I would love it if you Venmoed me a little bit and shared this picture of mine on your story. And I was like, great, awesome. And so did it and felt good. And I think we're in positive relationship now.
That's amazing. And that's something that I had would never have, I suppose, thought to do after having a conversation like that with somebody, to sort of to compensate them for their time and for their teachings. I know that I've been very adamant that it's not, and this is not an original thought by any means, but that it's not the job of the oppressed to teach the oppressors.
Absolutely. I mean,
And
yeah.
that they can't do, like, it's not fair for me to say, what am I doing wrong? How do I do better? Like, I just, or at least not to be able to do that, and expect nothing, to have to give nothing in return.
Yeah, and as a person of color, I will tell you that happens all the time. All the
I'm
time.
sure. I'm sure it
People
does.
are asking me, either explicitly asking me, explain this situation to me, or implicitly asking me to explain something to them in the way that they are approaching me about a certain topic. Um, and one thing I did really early on in the uprising, as I was posting about um, the protests, and white people and some were white Jews coming my onto my feed and saying, I don't understand this, explain this to me, how is this right, blah blah blah. um Almost immediately I was like, you know what, no. I'm sorry, maybe I'm the only person of color that I don't know, like I don't but no, it's 2020. I like, if you really still need someone to explain this to you, go to Google, go to a bunch of other books, go to another white person. Like, I'm not doing this anymore, at all.
Yeah.
Unless you are specifically, saying like, I want to pay you for this work, or I want to compensate you for this work. Would you do this work for me? Even asking, because a lot of people just assume that it's their right to ask a person of color and get an answer. Yeah, I'm like, no, I don't have the time or the emotional capacity for that at all right now. And most people are pretty understanding about that. And yeah, and just back to the reparations thing too. I think it's something that's somewhat of a newer idea, because in the last year, I definitely have been asked if people can compensate me for difficult conversations that they had about whiteness specifically. And it does feel good to be recognized, like, as a person of color, or in Jewish spaces as a Jew of color, the incredible burden that's put on us, to educate people about our experiences, like on a daily basis. It's tiring and overwhelming sometimes, and completely unfair, because there's a lot of great books and other resources out there.
I'm absolutely, and I think that's, again, I'm not going to pretend to speak for all, white Jews by any means.
Hmm.
Nobody wants nobody wants that, and I don't want to be doing that. But I do think I think we certainly do get accustomed to thinking that white or white passing Jews are, that that's what Jews are. We don't think necessarily of Jews of color, or Black Jews or Latinx Jews until we've met them, and then we have this, oh, I didn't know, sort of moment,
Yeah,
right? And I think that it's, I think if anything over these last 6 or 7 weeks, that is one of the things that it's helped, you know raise this awareness amongst the Jewish community that, we're not, as much as we try, we have areas in which we need to grow and do better in also.
absolutely. And I think, so two stories about that. So first, a funny story. Um, so I grew up at Temple of Aaron. We started going there when I was 5, because my parents aren't originally from Minnesota. They moved here from New York, which
Okay.
is like the epicenter of Puerto Rican Jewdom, I believe. Uh,
I would imagine so, yes.
yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, so I grew up in Temple of Aaron. I did leave, in my late teens, just due to kind of where I was in the world, and some issues that I had with the way the synagogue was back then. But I came back shortly after having my kids and having a really great conversation with Rabbi Fine, who's the head rabbi there. But so, just one day, I was in the Kiddush line after Shabbat services, and this older white Jew, starts interrogating me, and is like, is your husband Jewish? Who
Oh
are you? Like,
no.
did you convert? And this is an older woman, and I wanted to be respectful of that. And so I was just, kind of sarcastically answering her questions. And all of a sudden, this older man behind her, wait, let me think of a pseudonym for her. Okay. He all of a sudden he goes, "Cut the crap, Judy. I've been watching her run around in this synagogue since she was a little girl, and so have you. You know who she is." And I laughed so hard, and I was like, "Thank you, yeah." And because it was just this great moment, where he sees exactly what she's doing, and finally just gets fed up with it. Yeah, so that is not an isolated incident. It
Unfortunately, I'm sure it's not.
Yeah, yeah. But I've always, I won't say I've always. I think my awareness of the existence of Jews of color, is something that I've really learned more and more and more about, growing up. But it didn't really truly hit me until the first time that I went to Israel. And there it really hit me because I was experiencing it, and I'm a very experiential person. Um, that there are Jews from literally all over the world, and that the experience that we have here in Minnesota, and to some extent the United States, this idea that white Ashkenazi Judaism is Judaism is false. It's not even the majority. When you look at the numbers, in Israel of where Jews came from all over the world. That white Ashkenazi Judaism is actually the minority. And I say that just to again, push back on this narrative that we have in the United States that Jews are white. And also, I mean, that's a whole thing in itself. There's a reason for that narrative. White Jews absolutely push that narrative in an effort
Yeah.
to assimilate, and completely understandable. I mean, we could talk about that for hours. But in doing so, they have erased the very real big existence of Jews of color from all over the world.
Well, that's obviously a shame and an embarrassing, part of, Judaism. I mean, that's not something that anybody should look back on with any pride, certainly. So hopefully,
Well,
as we as a Jewish community, sorry, go ahead.
it's no, I would argue, yeah, not necessarily look back at with pride, but look back at with compassion. Because I think, I didn't grow up in my mother's generation or in my grandmother's generation. But, I think it's a common human story that we all want to do better for our children. All of us, all
Right.
humans in the world, we all want to do better for our children. And so, even just looking at Minneapolis, like if I was a Jew in, when my mom was a kid living in North Minneapolis, because that's where Jews lived, and really wanting to have like these bigger houses with bigger yards and, access to a country club or whatever, I mean, the American dream, right? It's the American
Right.
dream. Then I understand, and I feel compassion for them, really pushing that narrative to move ahead to do what they thought was best. I mean, I understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, you're right. We could probably go on for hours about this, and I think we'll save that for another conversation. But
Yeah.
I have last two questions to ask you.
Yeah.
What is your favorite Jewish food?
Oh, well,
Completely different direction from where we were, I realize.
I know. Oh my God. What is my favorite Jewish food? Dang. Well, I just this morning had lox and bagels. I love good lox and bagels. I spent way too much money at the co-op yesterday for those lox and bagels. But that's okay because we're in quarantine and we need to treat ourselves.
That
Um,
we've been doing that. We've been doing that all quarantine around here. Let me
right.
tell you.
Right, exactly. I also will say, and this might be somewhat controversial, but my mother makes the best matzo ball soup that you would ever eat. It blows every other mother's matzo ball soup recipe out of the water. So yeah, nice job, Mom. I love matzo ball soup.
Those might be fighting words for some
I know,
people.
right? We might have to have a matzo ball challenge after quarantine is over.
Absolutely. And what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh, what is my favorite Jewish holiday? I mean, I love the concept of Tu B'Shvat, the birthday of the trees. Like we celebrate the birthday of the trees, and we get to eat like all these fruits.
Right.
And it happening here in Minnesota in the dead of winter. It's like that always like, gives me a little tickle and makes me happy because, I love celebrating birthdays and maybe the trees don't get their birthdays celebrated enough. So definitely Tu B'Shvat. And then also, so for 3 years now, I have been reading Torah on Rosh Hashanah at Temple of Aaron. And I've always loved Rosh Hashanah, like again, apples and honey, sweetness, like,
Sure.
it's celebratory fun. And now it kind of has that added specialness to me that I have this Torah portion that I will now be reading until I pass on and it goes to somebody else. Like that's really cool and feels special to me. So yeah.
That's such a cool tradition that you've been able to read Torah for the last several years and want to continue on doing it. That's really cool.
Yeah. Well, it's funny though, because I didn't realize at Temple of Aaron that when you have a Torah portion for one of the high holiday services, that it's yours for life. And so when they approached me and they're like, "Hey, we have this Torah portion available for Rosh Hashanah. Do you want to take it?" And I was like, sure. And then I did it, and then they were like, "Great job, cool, it's yours for life now." I was like,
What?
Oh wait, I got that because somebody passed on or something. I
Oh
didn't feel like that
no.
was the tradition, but yeah, that's cool. Like Temple of Aaron has definitely been a part of my life, my entire life, and a really important part of my upbringing. And I'm really happy to be back there now. I'm happy with a lot of the changes that have happened there since I was there as a child in the 80s. And so to now be linked to it in that really special way.
Well, Candida Gonzalez, thank you so much for joining us. We will have links to your Instagram for both Larana's jewelry and your personal Instagram page, which is at Candida612.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yep.
We will have both of those in the show notes. But thank you for joining us this week. I enjoyed talking to you and learning from you. So Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun. And, also, like, this is also, I think, a Puerto Rican and a Jewish thing. Like, we could talk for hours and hours and hours with a million stories. So, love to come back sometime.
Well, you know what? I may take you up on it because I had a blast. So thank you for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Lonnie.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.